So today we are joined by Abdi Saltani, Executive Director of the ACLU Northern California. The ACLU works to defend the rights of all people nationwide. On video, we are joined by Legal Director of the National Center for LGBTQ Rights, Shannon Minter. NCLR works to achieve civil and human rights for all LGBTQ people and our families through litigation, legislation, public policy, and public education. And finally, also on video, we're joined by Aaron Morris, Executive Director at Immigration Equality, the nation's leading LGBTQ and HIV-positive immigrant rights organization. Please join me in welcoming our guests. So Abdi, we're going to get started with you. It's no secret that the strategy of the Trump administration is to bombard us with attempts to dismantle the protections that are designed to keep us all safe. We've seen an extraordinary amount of anti-LGBTQ executive orders as well as attacks to LGBTQ organizations and civil rights organizations. During a time that we're not hearing about a lot of wins, how have we been successful as a movement in protecting LGBTQ folks?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to all the remarks that preceded us coming up, truly inspiring, and I'm here with a lot of gratitude. There's a lot of backstory and a lot of history to what we fight for, and there's a member of Congress in 1866 who was speaking on the floor of Congress in support of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution around equal protection, due process, and the rights of all. And his name is Jehu Baker, and he said that he sees the 14th Amendment as vital, quote, to the security and future growth of liberty. And those words really stayed with me, the security and future growth of liberty. So to your question about what are the wins? I would say, first of all, the win is being ourselves, being who we are each and every day, showing up, speaking up, fighting back, being in solidarity, existing as human beings. Every person who is part of that is a win every day, despite the odds that face us at the level of people, who we are ourselves. Second, I would say, taking a longer view, we are in a horrible backlash right now. Our rights are being taken from us daily. Just today, many of us opened the news or checked the Supreme Court docket and saw the revocation of temporary protective status to 1 million people in excess of the case that my office is deeply involved in, and a real closing of the access to asylum, all just today. So I don't want to take away how devastating these things are, but the wins that we have had within our recent years are significant, and I think many of them are very durable. Just 6 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that employment discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity violates the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We shouldn't lose sight of the gains we have and that we live in and we work with. Those are our wins, and we shouldn't have them disappear into the woodwork like it wasn't our own victory and our own fight that got us there. And we have to secure those victories, as Jehu Baker said. But I would then say, third, there are victories every day, every week in our advocacy, in state legislatures and city councils, and even at the federal level. And I'll just give you two in the interest of the time we have. Just yesterday, a judge ruled in New York barring the Trump administration from seizing the confidential medical records of transgender youth in New York State and New York hospitals. That was just yesterday. A week and a half ago in Idaho, a federal judge ruled that a law passed in Idaho making it criminal for people to use bathrooms that match their gender identity, that law will not stand. And that's just in the last 2 weeks. And I offer those as examples. We have these stories from Kansas, from Ohio, from Montana, and of course right here in California.
Abdi, thank you so much. Considering the attacks by this administration, recent SCOTUS decisions, and attacks on LGBTQ people in general, it's more important than ever that we secure strong state protections. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the ACLU is doing right now to protect people across this country.
Yeah. So one of the fundamental principles, especially for those of us who live here in San Francisco or in the Bay Area or California, is that we live in a country, we have to protect the rights of every person in every part of the country. I'm the parent of a transgender daughter who's 19 years old, and I want her to be able to live anywhere in the United States without having to live in fear or to trade away her rights or liberty. So any law in any state that restricts any of her rights or any of our rights is also a restriction on her freedom of mobility from the state of California too. We're all in this mutually bound constellation throughout the United States. So it really comes down to two things. First, we are fighting bad laws, bad policies, and violations of rights in each and every state and the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. We work nationwide. So the ACLU of Idaho is on the ground fighting that law that I just spoke about. And that law is also about the liberty of my daughter who lives here, so that when she wants to go to Idaho, she can use the bathrooms there too, just as much. But second, here in California, we also, going to use the phrase, we're going to grind it out. We're going to fight and push the future growth of liberty in our state. We're not going to hold back. And when the Supreme Court or the Trump administration tries to take a bite out of it, we're going to come right back at that. So a good example of that is the right of trans youth in schools to be themselves, to be out with their names, to be share the name or pronoun that is their identity. California protects that right in our public schools. The Supreme Court took a bite out of that recently, and we're going to keep fighting it back. So my point is that here in our state, we're going to continue to push. We may face some setbacks, we will, but we'll continue to push back so our states can not just protect those rights, but can also advance them.
Abdi, thank you so much. I know that we are running a little bit late. I'm not sure if there's someone here right now. If we have time for questions, please keep them in your mind. If we have time, I'm happy to get to them. If not, we might not get to them. So just a quick housekeeping thing. Abdi, again, thank you so much. Shannon, we are going to go to you next. So one of the Supreme Court decisions that dropped this spring was the highly anticipated Childs versus Salazar. And this was the case about how states can regulate conversion therapy. Now, I know that you've been working on protecting young people from conversion therapy for more than 30 years. In fact, you started your career to work on this at NCLR over 30 years ago. And so I know this is something that you care very deeply about. I was also really impressed in how you tapped into this case and was really creative. And so I'm wondering, can you share some of the work, what did you do in working with Childs?
Yes, thanks so much, Amani. And oh my gosh, it's so great to be here with Abdi and Aaron. I appreciate y'all so much. So yes, I've been working on this issue for 30 some years, and I will just say conversion therapy, being subjected to it, is one of the most harmful things that can happen to a young person in our community. It is utterly devastating. It leads to very high rates of suicidality, dramatically high rates. In fact, nearly 60% of young people who are subjected to conversion therapy attempt suicide. It separates young people from their families at the very time they most need support from their parents and other family members. It's a devastating practice. So we worked with California to pass the first law protecting young people from conversion therapy that went into effect in 2012. I will say over like the next 10 years or so, half the country passed similar laws. It's the most quickly moving and successful legislative campaign I've ever been part of. And the reason for that is that we really truly had bipartisan support. Many Republican governors signed these laws, and people recognized that this should not be a partisan issue and just recognized, oh my gosh, this is a seriously harmful practice. Same way that if there was some medication that we knew provided no benefit but caused serious harm, of course states could ban it. So it was very disappointing when the Supreme Court decided to review a decision upholding Colorado's law. Colorado is one of about 25 states that have these laws. And the Supreme Court did end up holding that that law is likely unconstitutional. Uh, Again, very disappointing, but we worked. And we'll have more to say about that in a minute because it's not the end of the road by any means, not the end of the road on that issue. But we worked real closely with the Colorado Attorney General's office on briefing and preparing for argument. But more importantly, I think we worked so hard to get conservative voices in front of that court, conservative voices telling these justices that conversion therapy is extremely harmful and that, for example, we had a brief from conservative religious therapists who strongly supported Colorado's ban on conversion therapy, from conservative religious educators who strongly supported it, from conservative religious parents who shared gut-wrenching stories with the court, including several parents whose children died by suicide after being subjected to conversion therapy. The brief from the conservative religious therapist was so powerful and laid out for the court so graphically the way that these practices divide young people from their families. They teach young people that the reason that they're gay or transgender is some deficiency or problem with the way they were raised, and they actually cause young people to turn against their parents and to become fearful and mistrustful of them. And it also drives young people away from their faith communities. So it was pretty powerful to have these conservative religious therapists tell this very conservative court there are alternative therapeutic approaches to help young people who have a conflict between their religious faith and their sexual orientation or gender identity that do not cause them harm. We did, in one way, the case was, well, it was a loss. It was definitely a loss. The court held that Colorado's law was likely unconstitutional, but I am certain that those voices had a huge influence on the court because the opinion was very careful not to endorse conversion therapy and to acknowledge that it can be devastatingly harmful and that, in particular, people who are harmed by conversion therapy should continue to be able to bring malpractice cases holding therapists who harm them accountable. So, in that way, it was a victory to get to avoid the Supreme Court putting its stamp of approval on this horrific practice.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I wanted to ask you just a couple other questions, but one of the things that I hear you say time and time again is that there is always a counter move. And I want you to talk to me about the work you're doing that ensures that states will continue to protect LGBTQ young people from conversion therapy, and the public education work that you're doing that's leading to reach conservative religious parents like you were just talking about.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for asking that. And yes, I mean, your remarks, Amani, resonate with me so much. We have more power than we think. And half the battle is just not losing confidence in ourselves. And there is always a counter move. So in the face of this decision from the US Supreme Court, saying that Colorado's law is likely unconstitutional, we have looked at that decision very carefully. And the decision it's very technical. I mean, the court focused on just certain aspects of the way Colorado's statute was constructed that the court felt constituted viewpoint discrimination, was not sufficiently neutral. And so we are working with Colorado and other states to reenact these laws and just change the language, amend the language to make sure that it is very clearly viewpoint neutral, to sort of integrate the guidance that the Supreme Court has provided to states. And Colorado is the first state to do it. Colorado, the legislature was so responsible. We helped them draft a new law. They passed it. The governor signed it. So the law that was challenged in Childs is no longer on the books. that is going to, there's a new law. And so if the current case probably will either be mooted out or be dramatically changed. And I am confident that these new versions of these laws do comply with what the Supreme Court said in Childs. They should be held constitutional, and these protections should remain on the books. And then in addition to that, we're working with states, including Colorado, to extend the statute of limitations to give people who've been hurt by conversion therapy more time to bring malpractice claims. And that is essential because one of the ways these practices cause such terrible harm to young people and adults too who go through conversion therapy is that, of course, the so-called therapy, it doesn't work. There's no therapeutic technique that can change someone who's gay to not be gay or someone who's transgender to not be transgender. But people try, and young people in particular will try very hard if there's a therapist telling them that they can change. And then when they're not able to, because it's not possible, through therapy, then they blame themselves. And people suffer with that for years. And it generally takes people a long time to recognize it. It's not that they're broken or deficient or didn't try hard enough, that it's this therapy itself is so profoundly misguided and so harmful. But statute of limitations for malpractice claims is usually just 1 to 3 years. So Colorado has already extended that statute of limitations. California is about to do that. A number of other states are too. So I just want to say, at the end of the day, even though Childs was technically a loss, if we do the work that we need to do, we're going to end up in a stronger position with greater legal protections against conversion therapy and for people who've been harmed by conversion therapy. And just last little point on that, yes, we are working directly with conservative religious parents who understand that their decision to put their child into conversion therapy was a horrific mistake. Some of them have lost their children, and we are working with them to reach other conservative religious parents to let them know that this is not the right path and that there are alternative paths. And we're not asking people to change their fundamental beliefs or values. They don't have to do that. But whatever they do, we don't want them to put their children into a situation where they're going to suffer grievous harm. And that has been very successful. We've been able to reach, honestly, millions of families. And at the end of the day, that is the most important thing. If we can stop young people from being subjected to conversion therapy at the source by getting to their families, that is the goal. That is the ideal.
Shannon, thank you so much, and that just gives me chills too. I love knowing that when our backs are against the wall, we still find a way to turn things around. Thanks so much for your leadership. I wanted to ask one last question, and I also just wanted to, as your boss, thank you for being part of this panel today, because you were in court yesterday and had to take a red eye to be in front of a computer. I'm so grateful for you. But in our Stanford case, challenging the attempts by the Trump administration to use subpoenas issued in secret to seize family confidential medical records about their trans kids. This administration's attack against healthcare for trans folks has been absolutely devastating. And I want you to share more about the litigation that you're leading at NCLR that is fighting back against these discriminatory attacks by this administration.
Yes, and I was so happy, Abdi, to hear you mention that the decision from New York yesterday. That was phenomenal. Also about this same issue. And I will say I'm so proud of all our LGBTQ legal groups for linking arms and responding to this so forcefully and so aggressively and so quickly because we need to. Yes, I don't know. It's all happening so quickly. People may not even be tracking this, but this administration is doing something that, to the best of our knowledge, has literally never happened before in the entire history of our country, which is using first civil subpoenas and now unbelievably criminal subpoenas to try to directly seize private medical records. They're going after the private medical records of every family with a transgender child who has received medical care at any hospital anywhere in the country. I mean, this is an outrageous invasion of constitutionally protected medical privacy. Again, nothing like this has ever happened. No matter, people may not care. I think everyone listening here will care about what happens to transgender kids and their families. But even if you didn't care about this, setting a precedent that the federal government can just reach in and grab people's private medical records anytime there's a group of people they don't like or some kind of health care they don't like for political reasons, it is so dangerous. And I will say I'm proud of our groups. We've all jumped in, filed challenges to these subpoenas. There's been 8 federal district judges who have quashed those subpoenas and said, no way, there's no legitimate purpose behind this. This is completely outrageous behavior. That was the civil subpoenas. The Trump administration responded to getting shut down with these civil subpoenas by turning to criminal subpoenas, and the reason they did that is the criminal subpoena process happens in complete secrecy. Like no one would even know these subpoenas are being issued. And it's only honestly by happenstance that we and other legal groups found out about these criminal subpoenas. And so we rushed into court. Yes, we filed, the first challenge to one of these criminal subpoenas in California. ACLU filed real quick too, a challenge in New York. There was a positive decision in New York yesterday. I was arguing in front of a judge in San Jose yesterday too. We're waiting for his decision, hopefully protecting these families against what is truly one of the most outrageous abuses of federal power I have ever seen.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I really appreciate you. I know we have just a few minutes left, so we're probably not going to have time for questions. But Aaron, I want to go to you next. Most of us have seen some of the Trump administration's masked ICE agents roaming our cities, kidnapping people from work, from school, even from their own immigration court hearings. But what's gotten less coverage is Shanna has a few cats. What's gotten less coverage is the closure of immigration offices and the drastic cuts that are being made to staff, creating these already impossibly long delays and then making them even longer. And I'm wondering, Aaron, what are the impacts you've seen to LGBTQ asylum seekers?
Well, first of all, it's happy Pride. It's Pride in New York as well. For the last 20 years, I've only gone to New York City Pride, so I've never had the chance to go to San Francisco. But I am nevertheless absolutely certain that New York's is better. So this is everything I say is so dark in the immigration sphere. And there are certain systemic things that we use to our advantage in thinking about counter moves, as Shannon talked about. In the before time, when there were millions of people in a backlog, I think a lot of queer people would come to us and they were like so frustrated by how long it would take to have their day in court. Currently, there are 3.5 million pending cases in the immigration courts, and the Trump administration has fired 100 immigration judges, and another probably 100 were forced into retirement, took early retirement, or quit in protest because they were seeing the federal government bend or break the law on a daily basis and forcing them to do the same. So it's been really, really narrowed. And I just keep thinking of some advice when I was a baby gay that Mara Kiesling, who was the founder of the National Center for Transgender Equality, gave me, which is pretty simple and straightforward. When you are in a really hostile government, you stop the bad thing from happening. If you can't stop it, you slow it down. And if you can't slow it down and eventually you lose, you make them pay politically and in public opinion. And this is a real good mantra, I think, in the immigration sphere. In some ways, the system is set up to slow it down. And if you are a government that eliminates half of the adjudicators, it by definition slows things down. I mean, I think this is all Stephen Miller. It's all purposeful. So there are a lot of things that are happening where they're trying to expedite people being deported, limit due process, illegally deport people to places that are unsafe. Like, it's kind of a mess, but I just keep going back to this mantra of because we used to win north of 90% of the time, because there are so many places in the world where it's unsafe to be an LGBTQ person. And we're really good at what we do. It's both. And as we begin to lose, we're looking more towards strategies of what does appellate work look like? How do we build a record for circuit courts? Because the way that immigration law works is you're an immigration court, then you go through an intermediary body in the Justice Department, which is supposed to be objective. But again, the Trump administration also gutted it and then told them that they should just rubber stamp all decisions. But then you go to circuit courts. And, the benefit of winning a lot of cases in the before time was that we could get a result that was really positive for an individual person. A person fleeing persecution or torture from a country where they could not return. One silver lining may be that now that we are beginning to lose cases, as we slow it down and we push forth appeals, is that we might have really good results in circuit courts and make really good law, because you can't get there unless you lose. In the similar strategy, and we're not purposely slowing down any of these cases, the system is doing it for us. If someone has an immigration hearing 2 years from now, and then they have an appeal 2 years thereafter, we really hope to be in a different administration. And so we're doubling down on the people who are not having their day in court, who are being disappeared illegally, who are in detention. Like, those are the people in the most emergent need.
Thank you so much for that, Aaron. Appreciate it. And really explaining that strategy. I think it's also really helpful for us to understand the times when we wait and the times when we fight. And so thanks for that. I wanted to ask you, because earlier today, Immigration Equality released a report on the horrific effect of the Trump administration's so-called asylum cooperative agreements. Can you explain to us what those are and how they're being used to harm LGBTQ people?
So if we are going to court, we're losing some cases, we're winning some cases. It's not all a dark history. Some judges are doing the right thing. So the Trump administration is attempting to keep us from going to court. And one of the things that they're doing, which is patently illegal, is using so-called asylum cooperative agreements. In a perfect world, that would be some place like Canada. So that if someone came to the United States as a refugee and they asked for protection here, and Canada said, we'll do it, we could send them to Canada, they would have their day in court, and Canada would give them protection or not. The problem is the Trump administration has chosen asylum cooperative agreements with countries that are not safe for queer people. Those include Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Uganda. And Uganda is particularly distressing because they have a law against, quote, aggravated homosexuality, which covers a wide variety of penalties, including the death penalty. And we have, in fact, told someone, more than one person, that they can't even apply for asylum in the United States because a judge said it was okay for them to be deported to Uganda. And in Uganda, despite the deep danger people have, which is our biggest concern, they have no infrastructure to adjudicate anybody's asylum claim. So it's such an abrogation of justice. It's such an illegal move that we will, of course, challenge it in court, but we're scrambling at the moment to stop people from being deported to these places. The report that we issued is for people we didn't get to in time. They called us after the fact. So a woman who was illegally deported, who had protection in the United States, to be clear, a judge said, we will not deport you. And we will not deport you to your home country. And so the government warps that decision because they can't send her back there. And they sent her to Cameroon. And she is living in a detention facility where Cameroon has basically imprisoned her, where it's not safe to be a lesbian. And they have given her 2 months to decide where else she can go. And the biggest problem with this entire thing is not just that we're sending people to dangerous countries, is that those nations inevitably will send them back to their home country. So they never have an asylum adjudication in the United States. They don't go to a safe place afterward. and then they're sent back from this to the same place where they were persecuted. And so, when you think about what do you do about that? How do you change hearts and minds? You can bring litigation, but it doesn't help the individual person because litigation is slow. And one of the reasons we have released this report is going back to what Mara Kiesling said to me, was make them pay politically and in public, because love or hate queer people in the United States, nobody believes that we should be persecuted or tortured. That is almost like a universally held belief in the United States. So that's step one. We will, of course, pursue litigation in one of these cases. The problem is, if someone's quoted, it's really hard to get jurisdiction in a court in the United States. So we kind of have to find the person before it happens. But we will, of course, look for those individuals and do our best to help that person, always the person first, and then the movement overall.
Aaron, thank you so much, and thank you for explaining that so clearly. I think it's so often when we talk about LGBTQ folks, we don't often talk about immigration and asylum, and I really, really appreciate how much detail you went into that. I have just one more question for you. We see the landscape for asylum seekers is changing rapidly, and almost all progressive and even middle-of-the-road immigration judges have been fired by the Trump administration. And so many of our clients who thought they were safe are now being dragged into court. What are you doing in immigration equality to help protect our community? And what are some things that we can do as a community to help?
Well, one of the things that we have really pivoted to, and I think a lot of legal services who work with immigrants have, is the habeas petition district court litigation. So in the past, if something bad happened in a detention facility or someone was scooped up, we would have time as a legal services nonprofit to negotiate with ICE or to go before an immigration judge. But the Trump administration is moving people so quickly that and ICE is completely unhelpful, obviously now. One of the only litigation strategies district court with a habeas petition. And the idea behind a habeas corpus petition is that you ask a federal judge to determine whether someone is being legally or illegally detained. And in a lot of cases, they're detaining people who have legal status in the U.S., people who judges have deemed necessary for protection. In others cases, people are being held in such deplorable conditions, particularly transgender people, transgender women who they put into men's prison, that it's untenable. It's not just unnecessary, it's cruel. And so, I think nationally, there's some statistic that almost 50% of the habeas petitions that are being filed are being granted. The trick is, it really depends on the jurisdiction. So I'm in New York, you guys are in California, you'll have a really fair shake at a district court judge who will take a serious look at this person should not be detained and this person should not be deported. In other states where it is much more conservative, it's difficult. And the government knows that. And so they keep transferring New Yorkers and people from California to Louisiana, to Texas, where they won't win these habeas petitions. So there's a real scramble to get a petition on file quickly before someone's transferred, because it really matters where they're physically living at the time. But those have been seriously successful. I will also say we're always looking for pro bono counsel who wants to take on a case with us. We have limited resources, every legal services does, but what we're really good at is training other lawyers. And then finally, we're really helping people who do not have lawyers help themselves. So we've invested a lot in self-help manuals, in human rights reports available on our website, immigrationequality.org, free legal advice. We'll kind of do whatever we can to get person on the right. And if they win, fantastic. If they don't, then maybe we can step in for the appeal. What can other people do? There's these really remarkable things in community happening in Portland and in Minneapolis, these places that had surges where immigrants are so afraid to do anything, rightly so, right? Where people who have legal status, honestly, a lot of white people who won't be pulled over, won't be targeted, won't be subject to ICE raids, with some limitations, have offered to, through churches, through schools, through community centers, really sent out the offer to, I will take you to work. I will pick up your kids from school. I will go get your medication. I will go get your groceries. I'm not sure if that's practical on a national scale. Maybe it is. But if your community is being raided or targeted and it's like an everyday risk for an individual who's undocumented to be in the world, I think there's a lot that we could do as a community to alleviate some of that risk.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate that. I know that we are out of time, but I do want to ask just one more question to Abdi. Are there ways that individuals can do work in their lives and in their communities to help LGBTQ people right now? Is there anything that you all are thinking about?
I think the absolute number one. Oh, thank you. I would just say, as we come into this midterm election, we have to vote with just a great deal of energy. Get out the vote in every congressional district, however it was gerrymandered, and just overwhelm the political system. I love your point, Aaron, about just making people pay a price, and I think that getting out the vote in mass this election, no matter how much suppression, how much gerrymandering, just get out the vote, get out as many people to vote this election as fast as possible.
Abdi, thank you so much. Abdi Saltani at ACLU Northern California, Aaron Morris at Immigration Equality, and Shannon Minter, National Center for LGBTQ Rights. Please join me in thanking our panel.